Sometimes when you work with Excel, if you just knew the right function, you might be able to save yourself some time, but you don't, and so you wind up spending hours, if not days, doing something that if you just knew how to do it would save you so much time and energy. Well, we're going to look at a couple of those things today. One is text to columns, although it doesn't necessarily have to be text, but certainly taking information that has all been jammed into one cell and spreading it out over several. We're also going to look at what you can do to find duplicates in a big list of, say, addresses or other kinds of information. And then we're also going to look at consolidating, because you don't necessarily have to write a formula to come up with a summary of all of the sheets that are in a workbook. It's just amazing what Excel can do and how smart it is. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and we're going to look at some things today that are going to help you get back your time. For our example today, we have a short name and address list, and in column A, we have both the first and last names. In column B, we have the street address, and then column C, we have city, state, and zip. And we would like to separate out those three items and place city in column C, state in column D, and zip in column E. Now, we have some irregularities here. It's always best if your data is as clean as possible. So even in this short example, I can see that in this name and address, there's a comma after the state, but as I come down here to row 5, there is no comma here after this state. And it's something that we would either fix ahead of time, or we could look at it and say, well, that's no big deal. I can fix it on the back end. And we'll just look at some ways that we can work with our data to make this splitting out text to columns work. Well, first of all, I'm going to select column C here, and then what we want to do is we want to go to data, which is here in the tabs above the ribbon. And then when we click on data, what we can do is come over to the right to the group that is named Data Tools. And with Data Tools, there are a lot of different kinds of buttons here, but we are going to look at the very first one, Text to Columns. And when we decide to work with text to columns, we're going to go through a wizard that will help us step through that particular process. So to get started, we'll select column C because that's the one that we want to split the text out from to other columns. And then we're going to go to text to columns, and it tells us at the top that is a 3-step process. And the first one is we need to decide if it's delimited or fixed width. And almost all data anymore is delimited, meaning that it's separated by a tab or a comma or a space or some other piece of punctuation generally that separates the different pieces that are within the cell. Well, we know that we have commas, and we'll click Next. And then we'll come here, and almost always tab is set as the default delimiter. But in this case, we know that we have commas, and as I look down at this data preview, I can see that I also need to account for spaces where I don't have a comma. So I'm going to also add space. Now, that doesn't quite look right either, but we're going to go ahead and go with these settings for this time. So then we'll click on Next at the bottom right. And as we look at the example, it even says that here in the upper left, we can decide the format of each column. Now, as I go to the right, it says, well, General is going to convert numeric values to numbers. It's going to convert date values to dates, and all of the remaining values are text. Or I can actually say, oh no, this is specifically text, this is specifically date, and it's up to me how I want to define that data. But general is good enough for what we need to do, and then at the bottom right, we'll click on Finish, and it has moved our data to different columns. Now, the only thing is, when we did this, city is absolutely in the correct column now, column C, and for the most part, state is correct and zip is correct. However, because we had St. Louis, that is 2 words, so there's a space between those 2 words, and let's see, Kansas City, which also has 2 words with a space between the 2 words, it moved everything over a little bit too far. So I think we were in the right ballpark, but we still need to figure out what to do. I've reset our example to look like it did in the beginning, and we know that we need to fix St. Louis and Kansas City so that in some way Excel knows that those should be treated as just one entity, one idea, and to ignore the space in between those 2 words. So I'm just going to use Control F to find, and I want to find, first of all, St. Louis, and I want to replace it with quote, St. I see I spelled it wrong. Quote, St. Louis, quote, and let me fix St. Louis here. So now I'm going to find St. Louis the way it is currently and replace it with St. Louis with quotes around it. And I'm just going to replace all. And it said they made 2 replacements. Well, while we're here, let's find Kansas City and replace it with quote, Kansas City, quote, and replace all. I'm going to close out of Find and Replace. Now I'm going to select column C. I'm going to go back to Data, go to the right where we have our Data tools, go Text to Columns. It is delimited. We'll click on Next. We're still going to keep our comma and space delimiters, but on the right here, it says text qualifier, and the default is quotes. I can click the drop down here, and it could be that we would want a single quote instead, or certainly not none. But notice that already in our data preview, that because we used a text qualifier, we know that this is going to work. We can click on Next. If we want to, we could yet again define those columns that are coming in as special kinds of data, either text or date. And then on the right, we'll click Finish. And now we have a working list where we have names in one column, street in another, city in another, state in another, and zip in another. Isn't that just remarkable? Now let's shift gears a little bit, and we still have that same address list with the addition of Social Security in the second column. And we might decide to be sure to check for duplicates. Now, when you check for duplicates, this can become quite a challenge. You want to look for duplicates with enough information to make sure that you don't delete something that is in fact not a duplicate, even though initially and with just a few cells it looks like it could be. So let's look at that a little bit. First of all, one of the ways that we can look for duplicates, and I'm just going to select all of these cells, is that we can go to the Home tab and we can go to Conditional Formatting. And when we go to Conditional Formatting, if we go to the Highlight Cells Rules portion of the conditional formatting, down at the very bottom, we can in some way add conditional formatting to duplicate values. So let's click on duplicate values. And as I look at this before we go any further, I can see that there's no value to have selected the city, state, and zip because, of course, there's going to be more than one person who lives in a particular city and state. So I'm going to cancel out, and I'm going to go back and select just A, B, and C columns because I think that's where the value is. Now I'm going to go to my conditional formatting, highlight cells rules, duplicate values, and I really don't like, for some reason, that light red. So I'm going to go with green fill and click OK. Now we're going to look at this in some detail because we do have the same name. Now with really large address lists, for example, it is absolutely possible that you can have the same name, but it is two different people. So then you would want to find something like the Social Security, which is very unique to just one person. And in this case, the Social Security is the same. So while it's a duplicated record to some extent, because now we verified that this is Kimberly Statham and it's the same thing twice, now when we look at the street, what does that tell us? She's moved. And so we don't know which is the current address, but we do know that we don't want to say that this is an absolutely duplicated record. It's just the same person with two different addresses. And so this could really save us. We don't want to delete either one of these for fear we delete the wrong one. As a first step, using conditional formatting and looking for duplicates is kind of a nice way to figure out if you have, say, duplicate names. And then you can go to another place in Excel to even explore a little bit more. So we're going to go back to data above the ribbon. And this time we are looking for duplicates. Now it's a little hard to see here, but it's to the right of text to columns. It has a blue row, a white row, a blue row in that little icon, and more importantly, it has the X to delete. So we'll click Remove Duplicates. And it says to delete duplicate values, we want to select one or more columns that contain duplicates. Now remember, city, state, and zip, you're going to have more than one person with the same city, state, and zip, especially in a large list. So we're going to take that off. Again, we're going to look for a duplicate name, and in this case, we know it's going to be Kimberly. We're going to look for a duplicate Social Security number, which again is Kimberly. So far, same person. But then, to make sure that we're not deleting something that needs to stay and that we might need to do some more work on, we're also going to keep street selected here. Now, in the right of this little dialog box, it says, My data has headers. So we also want to keep that in mind. Well, we'll click OK. And it says, nope, no duplicate values are found. Now, let's go ahead and select this table again, but this time, when we go to Remove Duplicates, let's take off Street and City, State, and Zip. Now, remember, Kimberly has the same name and Social Security number twice. It's the address that makes the records unique. So now, we'll click on OK. And one duplicate value has been found and removed. And sure enough, you can look at that table and the second instance of her name has been removed. So when you use this, while it is very helpful, be sure that you select enough information that you can find the unique values beyond just kind of the obvious. But wow, what a time saver. If you had 10,000 names and addresses and you had to go through manually, oh my goodness, what a mess. but this is so helpful. Our next set of examples have to do with consolidate. And this is a feature that, while you need to be a little careful and really know your data well, can just be a miraculous fix for you, where you don't have to write formulas to, say, create a summary sheet. Now, there are two different ways that you can consolidate with Excel. The first way is by position. So basically, that means that the worksheets you draw the data from must be set up exactly the same way. The categories of information must be in exactly the same order. So basically, identical worksheets, just different data within them. Whereas you could also summarize by category, meaning that the categories can be in different order. The worksheets don't necessarily have to be identical, but it picks up on the categories, and then Excel says, well, for this category, we will do this kind of math and come up with a summary. So, such a nice tool. Let's look at how we can do this. For our first example, we're going to look at our consolidate by position. And let's look at January first. And in January, we have the expenses, at least the beginning of the expenses for the month, and they are listed in column B. Column A has the date that they were paid. That's in the details here in this worksheet, so I don't think I need to really, for a summary, also display that information. What I want to do is know how much I have spent so far this year. So definitely I want to look at the category, but then I also want to look at the amount that I have spent this month. And then I want to come to February and look at those expenses as well. Now the dates have changed, but notice that the items are in exactly the same order as January, and then I have amounts for those as well. And generally, a lot of these amounts are going to be the same, but I want to add to see what I have spent January and February of this new year. So to do that, I'm going to go to the summary sheet, and then I need to click where I want that summary to begin. And I'm going to go to the Data tab, and over to the right, Data Tools, and then in the upper right of that group, we have Consolidate, and I'm going to click on Consolidate. Now, the first thing that I need to decide is what is the function that I'm going to use, and it defaults to sum, and in fact, that's what we will do because we want a total. But if I click the drop-down, I could get a count of how many numbers are being summarized within the sheet that I'm creating. I could come up with an average, so over 6 months, I've spent an average of that kind of thing. I might decide to do that. Max would look at all of the numbers that have a particular category, and it would say, here's the largest number of this group of numbers, whereas min is the smallest number within that group of numbers. Product is you would take all of the numbers and multiply them together. Count numbers simply counts numbers as opposed to, say, text. Standard deviation and variation is more statistical. We're going to keep this very simple, and we simply want to come up with a sum for January and February. Now below that, I have a reference box. When I click in that box, I need to come over to the right to the arrow. Now there's also a browse button here, but that actually kind of takes me out to File Explorer, and I could find another workbook to find this information, but we're just going to stay within the same workbook. So I'm going to click the up arrow. So now, where am I going to get this consolidate information? Well, I'm going to go to January. As soon as I click on January, in that box where I've clicked, it says January, but it also has the exclamation point, which means this is the name of a worksheet. And then what is the information that I want to summarize? Well, I definitely need to include the item, and I definitely need to include the amount. And so I now have defined that range, so I'll go to the far right and click on that down arrow that expands this dialog box out. Now this is where you can get caught a little bit, because it looks like, all right, I've said I want January and the cells in January that are going to be added for my summary. But in fact, what I need to do is come down a little bit farther, and on the right, click Add. Now when I click Add, now it's added it to this box that says All References. And whatever is in that All References box, that is what is going to be included in the summary. So now let's go back, because it's not just January, and we're going to go to the up arrow, and instead of January, we're going to come down to the February Worksheet tab, click on it, and it even removed that January reference, and now I have February. And again, I'm going to click and drag over those items, keeping in mind that all of these are in the same order. Go to the right of that dialog box to expand it out. And again, don't forget to go to the right and click Add. So now I have January and February references. I definitely have item and amount, top row. I think I'd like to keep that. Left column is what is going to be the item. So we'll say, yes, we want to use the left column. We can create links to the data source as well. So we'll click that. And now in the right, we'll click OK. Look at that. Let me widen this out a little bit. So starting here in A6, I have the rent or mortgage and the total amount. This is where it gets even more interesting, because I go out to the left of rent and mortgage, I have a plus sign. And in fact, Excel has created an outline. So when I click the plus sign, oh my goodness, now it's showing me, and it would be kind of hard to tell which is which, but I have the first example from January and the other one from February. They were both 800, so I can see this total of 1,600, but I also see how I got that total just by simply expanding by clicking on the plus sign. Now I can come back to the minus sign, and all I see is just the total. But wasn't that easy? No real math involved. I just had to say, this is what I want to summarize, and ta-da, here I have my summary by position. Now let's look at our second example of consolidation, which is category. And to understand how that works, we need to go to our spreadsheets. So let's go to January 2. And when we look at it, we can see that we have car insurance through water. And oddly enough, we have phone in there twice, which means, well, we've made 2 payments. Maybe we had to pay for repairs. Maybe we paid something late and didn't realize it, so now we're catching up on our payments. But for whatever reason, the phone payments for this month actually become $205. Also notice that when you look carefully at these items, they have been sorted A to Z, except for this additional phone payment at the end. Coming over to February, we have the same exact names for things. In fact, we have ISP twice here. But we have sorted this list Z to A. So let's look at how this works when the items are not in the same position. So we'll go to category here, summary sheet category, and make sure that we're in the data tab. And in the data tools group, we'll go to consolidate. And we're going to just get a sum, a total of what is in the two sheets so far. So for our first reference, we'll go to that arrow that points up, and we're going to go to January 2, and then we're going to select B3, which is item, C3 amount, and then come down and select all of those payments for that month. And when they show up in the text box, we'll go to the right and click on the down arrow, which expands our dialog box. And then we always have to remember that we're not finished just by putting in the reference. We need to come over to the right and click Add. Now we also need to work on February. So we can't even keep this reference here and simply click on February. And let's see what it does. No, it says that it's B3, yes, through C11. For some reason, we have an extra payment in here that we didn't have with the first month, and everything is upside down and backwards as well, but we need to change that 11 to a 12. So for February, B3 through C12, and then just as we did before, we'll click on Add. So we have our two sets of references for our two spreadsheets, but we also need to remember to use labels in, and if we don't check that left column, we aren't going to know if it's water or gas or phone, so we definitely want the left column. We're not going to create links to the source data this time, so we're not going to be able to click and expand to see the entries for all of the months. We'll leave that blank, and then we'll click OK, and it says just that fast. It says what the totals are for January through February, noting that phone is $335, which is, when I look at it, here's phone, a total of $205 here, and as we look at phone, $130, which would be $335. By the same token, the ISP is 100 here. Let me even highlight that a little bit, make it bold. So the ISP is 150 plus what was in January, 100. So that should be 250. When we come to our category, there it is, 250. So it's picked up double entries as long as they were spelled correctly, even though they were certainly out of order from the other list. So here by category worked, and we have a summary for the first 2 months. Now this is something that you may really want to explore. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.